I'm Edward October. The sounds you hear are the dark rites of a black mass. This is the start of Octoberpod. Welcome, traveler. On this edition of Octoberpod, we're telling tales which are all, to varying degrees, about the same character, the devil. What follows is nearly 2 hours of true, true-ish, and classic tales of witch hunts, moral panic, sinners, devils, demons, dark angels, and diabolical divination rituals. Let's get to it, shall we?
Good morning. Something kind of weird happened to a buddy of mine. This would have been about 12 or 15 years ago now, down in Sevierville, Tennessee, around in the foothills of that area. My buddy Nate had lived with his wife for years and years in this little community in the Smoky Mountains. It's a deeply religious area. I've been there myself, and I can attest that there's at least 6 churches and a 12.5-mile radius. Nate was very active in his church. In fact, he'd just been named a deacon about the time this happened. This one night in question, Nate told his wife he was going out hunting. Told his wife not to wait up for him. Of course, he wasn't really going hunting. Didn't even take his rifle. Never really told me why he was going out that night. In any event, he drove his Toyota truck to an ill-maintained access road up on the mountain. It was one used by the TVA, but for whatever reason it had fallen into misuse. Parked his truck and hiked about a mile into the brush. Nate was kind of going along for a little bit there, till he came across a figure leaning against an old locust tree. Nate yelled out, "Who's there?" and the figure told him he was an old friend of the family. Said he knew Nate's daddy pretty well. Now this figure was an old man. Nate said he was tall and carried a long walking stick. The old man asked Nate if he wanted to see the true nature of the world, and Nate told him yes he did. And then the old man told him to walk a piece with him and pay attention. Led Nate down to this clearing where they could see quite well in the moonlight. There's an old woman there. When Nate told me the story, he called her a hag. Now this hag looked at the old man with the stick and asked him if he was her daddy. He laughed and said she'd guessed right. Now this is kind of weird, I guess you'd say, but Nate swore it's all true. Hag started talking about a big party, bonfire she called it. The old man said they'd be there soon enough. She talked about this bonfire like it was gonna be some kind of orgy. Now my buddy Nate, being a church-going man at the time, found all this talk to be disgusting, to say the least. On top of it all, he started to realize that this old hag looked an awful lot like a Sunday school teacher at the Baptist church. As they turned to go on their way, the old man handed the hag his walking stick. She took it and hopped on it like the stick horse. Nate said she started fooling around with this stick in an indecent manner till she finally flew away, riding it like a witch on a broomstick, just sort of levitated off the ground. It's right about this time in the story that Nate reassured me that all these events actually took place. Now, I could say many things about Nate, but I'd never call him a liar. Well, what happened to Nate was he's quite disturbed to see this Sunday school teacher take off in such a manner. Turned to his companion, told him it was time he went home to his wife. The old man just laughed at him, told Nate he'd be seeing his wife real soon. The trail through the woods led down an embankment and intersected with a crooked old dirt road. About that time, along come an old pickup truck. There's a bunch of fellers in the bed of the truck. There's whooping and hollering and carrying on. The truck stopped when they saw the old man. When they parked, they could clearly see who the men were. One was the preacher down at the Presbyterian church, several deacons from the Methodist church. They'd also recognized the youth pastor from his own church, as well as a member of the town council. As soon as he realized these men might be able to identify him, they'd hid in the brush and let the old man do the talking. Of course, these fellers spoke to the old man like he was on their way to a strip club. Nate couldn't understand all of what they were saying, but he picked up a number of references to a bonfire. Also spoke about some new girl they were eager to have their way with. Old man said he'd see them soon, and they drove off. Of course, all this puzzled and confused my buddy Nate. He was frightened, but his curiosity, guess you'd say, it overwhelmed him. Told the old man to lead on. Nate said they walked for miles, but it only seemed like 15 minutes had passed. Said they walked through some thick, dark country, but the old man didn't need a light. Till finally they saw the light off of a roaring fire peeking through the trees. They walked towards it, and of course this was the bonfire the two of them had heard so much about. Now at this point, the story Nate told me becomes vague in the telling. My buddy Nate always became agitated, I guess you'd say, whenever he tried to recall the things he saw there. He spoke of people dancing naked around the fire, caked in blood. Told me of how the dancing eventually led to unspeakable acts. One time he called it a pageant of obscenity and said that the devil worshippers, and that's what they were, seized every opportunity to mock the rituals of the church. But still he never gave too many details of this. Said there was a ritual there. Said there was a ritual performed involving a goat that he refused to speak about in any detail. Many of the old crones there chanted black magic incantations. Some of them levitated high above the fire. My buddy Nate, he said that he is frozen with fear, and he just sort of laid low, hoping he wouldn't become involved in any bloodletting. Some time passed, and a few fellers come along and placed a log across two old stumps opposite the fire. They decorated it with bones and greasy-looking candles to form a sort of altar. Then a young woman, naked as the day she was born, was led up to the altar. And you guessed it, is Nate's own wife. At some point in all this, old man who had been Nate's guide had disappeared. Nate was too busy gawking at the revels to take note. But now the old man reappeared at the altar. Nate said that the old man's features slowly became goat-like until he resembled Baphomet. If you ever seen the commercials where the devil's got kind of a goat head and wings, well, that's what he looked like. Now Nate got rather sketchy on this part of the story, but it came to pass that his wife participated in a ceremony to become something that they called the Queen of Hell. He never said what acts she had to perform to consummate this union with the devil, but he assured me that pretty horrific session. Said that he never stopped having nightmares. Well, not much to tell after that. Nate couldn't remember how he got home, but suffice it to say that when he saw his wife, he called her a faithless Jezebel and left her on the spot. I don't think he ever saw her again. Heard from other fellers in his town, said he'd come back to church one Sunday, cussed out the preacher, outed everyone in the congregation who'd consorted with the devil. Then he run off on his own. When I bumped into him, he was living in an old double-wide trailer that he'd parked 2 counties over. He swore to me that everything he said was true, and I believe every word of it. About a week after I talked to him, a neighbor found him. He'd hung himself with an electrical cord. Next to him, there was a case of Miller beer and a note. The note said, "The world we see is fake. The only reality is the reality of the fallen." I don't believe he ever got over what he seen in the woods.
I grew up in a very rural, deeply religious area. A small town bound by mountains to one side and a good-sized river on the other. I grew up in an age before the internet and fed myself on a steady diet of B-movies and VHS from the local mom-and-pop video store. It was during the height of satanic panic. There was no Snopes to consult for fact-checking. All the contemporary lore I'd heard came from the mouths of other school children. These tales were therefore taken as God's truth. Now, keep in mind, in this community, the devil is no metaphor. The devil is real as you or I, and as close as the demon that now stands, unseen, just over your shoulder. Churches held regular tent revivals where dynamic young preachers would guest lecture on the very vividly described nature of hell. Preachers who, in their zeal to save souls, came off as having more faith in... But I digress. Every Halloween, stories began to circulate about the Black Church. The story goes that on a mountain near our town, I won't name it, there's an old, abandoned, one-room church that's been taken over by a satanic cult. They painted the walls black, thus the name, and vandalized the remains of the altar and anything containing scripture or images of Christ. At these black masses, the cult would play satanic heavy metal music. Now, this little detail may sound corny today, but to middle school kids who were told that AC/DC stood for After Christ the Devil Comes, and KISS stood for Knights in Satan's Service, this detail rang true. The Black Church cult was blamed for all sorts of dreadful deeds of darkness, like stealing house pets, especially black cats, burying them up to their necks and running over them with lawnmowers. Most terrifying of all, we were told that on Halloween night, they'd round up all the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys they could and sacrifice them to the devil. This always sent kids into a panic, especially blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys. One year, the hysteria reached a fever pitch. So many kids were upset that the guidance counselor called an emergency assembly to tell the kids there was nothing to fear. The nurse's office was full, and several kids had to be sent home early. As an adult, it's easy to see that the story is nonsense and probably cobbled together from dozens of other similar urban legends. Still, whenever someone disappears in the woods while hunting or fishing, or if a body turns up on a local trail, which is not uncommon, it's hard not to wonder whether they ran afoul of the Black Church cult.
I have a really good story for you, and I hope you like it, or are creeped out by it, or whatever. I was reminded of it while I was home for Thanksgiving, and mi abuelita asked if I was still working at the Gap. Actually, just to be clear, I've never worked at the Gap. I worked at a boutique next to the Gap in my hometown years ago. But abuelita's memory isn't what it used to be. And anyway, I knew what she meant. This little town I grew up in had a sort of historic downtown. The buildings were old, and the local chamber of commerce tried to make sure they were filled with cute shops and a bunch of Martha Stewart-looking cafes. They still have an awesome coffee shop that makes these unbelievable Nutella crepes for Sunday brunch. Anyway, that's the area where I worked. It was while I was finishing the coursework for my certification to teach K through 6th. The boutique was called Rosie's Rag Patch. It was owned by this sweet old Bolivian couple, Hector and Rosaria, and they ran the shop out of this creaky old Victorian house. They sold handmade jewelry and lots of this flowery old hippie lady fashion. I guess you could call it boho or shabby chic, but like the old lady version of that, for white people. I remember they had this silly billboard in town. It was a picture of some wide-eyed soccer mom type lady. She's holding a wrapped gift, and the caption says, "Please let it be from Rosie's Rag Patch." Anyway, I was hired on shortly after there was this big fire downtown. The fire started when lightning struck the house next door. That house burned down, and later a Gap was built on the lot. So, abuela was close. But the fire spread to Rosie's Rag Patch. There was a little bit of fire damage and a lot of water damage from where the firemen tried to put it out. So, where was I? Oh, okay. So they hired me, and I got there in June. They were in the process of doing demo work on the damaged rooms. The worst damage was in the old boiler room they had been using as a stockroom. So they knocked down this moldy-ass drywall and ended up exposing some of the house's original brickwork. The brick wall was as old as the house itself. I think it was built right before the Civil War or right after. Somewhere around there in the early 1800s. And the first thing anyone noticed was this painting. It looked old, too. Hector said the drywall had been up since the 1970s, but the painting could have easily been 100 years old. I snapped a picture of it and showed it to my old youth pastor, and he said it reminded him of the illustration of the devil in the Codex Gigas. You should do an Octoberpod about that someday. I would have scanned this picture and emailed it to you, but I don't have it anymore. You'll understand why I got rid of it later. Anyways, I got off track. So this painting on the brick was definitely a devil or a demon, or straight up Satan. And it made the thing in the Codex Gigas look downright cute and cuddly. It looked too well done to be graffiti, but too crude to be the work of a trained artist. Its head was like a goat or a ram with long curled horns. The horns had some kind of ribbed texture with sharp points. It had the torso of a man, a hairy man with a symbol of some kind tattooed on its chest. It had 3 arms on each side, all splayed out, and each hand was either holding something like a dagger or a cup or a scale, or doing some weird gesture. Kind of like an esoteric sign language, I guess. It had 2 legs. No one could make out if the legs were supposed to be from a hooved mammal or a dragon with heavy scales. It had 3 serpents hanging from its mouth like tongues. But the thing I remember the most, the thing I'll always remember, are the eyes. They were so big and expressive, and the only part of the image that used the color white. So the whites of these huge, staring eyes seemed to glow against the dark brick and the muddy-looking paint used for the rest of the image. Some of the girls in the store made up a game. You stare into the eyes for a certain period of time, like a full minute. And if you close your eyes, you could still see the whites of its eyes. Like one of those optical illusions they have in kids' activity books or something. I did it once, but I wish I hadn't. It kinda burned the eyes into my memory. Another girl who worked at the store did it, and she freaked the hell out. She locked eyes with the thing for a minute, like the game said to. There was another girl, Lupe, timing her and giggling the whole time. When the minute was up, she closed her eyes. We expected her to say, "Whoa, that's freaky," or something like that. Like what we all would have said. But no. The girl kept her eyes closed for a long time. And then she started sobbing and running around the room like she was blind. She still had her eyes clenched shut. When she opened them, her eyeballs were solid red, like she had pink eye or she had just been punched. She kept sobbing and ran to the bathroom. We heard her in there barfing for like 20 minutes or something. Lupe started a rumor that the girl was bulimic. Lupe was such a bitch. It was around that time that we started urging the owners to hurry up and put up the new drywall. Hector eventually covered it up with a sheet or something, but Miss Rosie kept going behind his back and taking the sheet down. Someone asked Miss Rosie why she wanted it uncovered, and she said that she believed the devil was a god who watched over the house, and we must treat it with respect and keep it happy. He's the one who saved the store from the lightning strike in the fire, while the other one next door burned down, she would say. Once she said she suspected that Nilo, that's what she started calling it, may have conjured the lightning to ensure his face would be uncovered. Hector seemed embarrassed by his wife's ramblings. He said that Miss Rosie had a cousin who worked in a silver mine in Bolivia. It's very dangerous work, and the miners believe that a devil or a god of the mountain controls their fates, especially if there's a cave-in or toxic fumes. The miners have a statue of a devil at the entrance to each mine. They leave offerings at its feet to win its favor and protect themselves from danger. Hector said that the devil on the wall must surely remind Rosie of her cousin. And just like one of those miners, Rosie began greeting Nilo and leaving offerings for it. Usually it was flowers that she placed at Nilo's feet. Nilo preferred carnations, she said. Miss Rosie would do them all up in a nice vase and everything, and just leave them there until they wilted and started to rot. Whenever they got too stinky, Hector or somebody would throw them out. But sometimes, the same flowers sat untouched for weeks and weeks. One time, Miss Rosie baked a pan de los muertos and left it as an offering. It got moldy pretty quick, and everyone was afraid it would draw mice or other pests. I'm going to tell you this next part as quickly as I can, because I'll start to freak out if I stop to think about it too long. There was this week when the store was very slow. For anyone who's ever worked at a mom and pop business, you know this can be a really stressful time. Hector and Rosie kept hoping that someone would come in and make a big purchase so that they could buy groceries that week. I never knew if they were exaggerating or not, but that's something I still wonder about. So, Miss Rosie had a lot of time on her hands and decided to make a big offering to Nilo. She came in one morning with a pot of this stuff that was about the color of fresh motor oil. She took a pastry brush and started painting the wall with it, all over Nilo's hands and feet, and then she lit a candle. It was a lavender-scented candle that they sold at the store, and placed it against the wall. All of us girls working that day asked her about it. Miss Rossi told us there was a rabbit that had been eating all the cilantro she had planted in her garden. She said she waited for it to come back and shot it. Before she butchered it for a stew, she said she bled it out in a pot and left the blood as an offering for Nilo. And guess what? That same afternoon, this lady came in and bought a $300 coat and ordered a bunch of jewelry for the bridesmaids to wear at their daughter's wedding. Miss Rosie was convinced that her blood offering had pleased Nilo. Well, my coworker Lupe didn't approve at all. She may have been kind of a catty bitch, but she was very religious. Well, she wasn't religious enough to stop the crow game with Nilo's eyes after the other girl freaked out, but she was religious enough to feel as though making blood sacrifices to it was somehow crossing a line. Lupe lost her shit and kinda cussed out Miss Rosie and stormed out without finishing her shift. I'm surprised Hector and Rosie didn't fire her. She came back to work the next day. She was on the schedule. But she acted very weird and mopey. Now, I wasn't around to see what happened. But apparently, Lupe was working in the store by herself one day. Hector and Rosie were off running errands, and business was so slow at the rag patch that they sent the other girl home for the day. Allegedly, Lupe closed up shop early and snuck into Nilo's room. She threw all Miss Rosie's offerings in the dumpster, scrubbed the blood off the wall, and painted over Nilo with a thick layer of white paint. Then she pasted pages from a King James Bible all over the walls, kinda like wallpaper. I always wanted to know what Miss Rosie would have said to Lupe when she found out. But as it turns out, Miss Rosie never got a chance to confront her. Lupe never made it home that night. It started raining when she left the store. As she was driving past an exit ramp to the interstate, a cement truck hauling about 15 tons of cement came down the ramp too fast and ran into the cross traffic. It plowed into Lupe's car, and she died instantly. Now, I wasn't there to see it, but the rumor was the next morning, all the Bible pages had fallen off the wall. As though the glue Lupe had used wasn't strong enough. But not just a page here or there. Every last page. And even though Lupe had painted over Nilo with several fresh coats, the image of Nilo managed to bleed right through it. Its eyes were just as piercing as always. Needless to say, shit had gotten too freaky for me, and I got another gig until I could land the teaching job I wanted. I never found out what happened to Hector and Rosie after I left. But I do know that the store, or rather the house it was in, went up for market a few months later. No one ever bought it though. Because that summer, a heavy storm hit downtown and lightning struck it. And Rosie's rag patch burned to the ground. I can't imagine what would have happened if I stayed longer. As soon as Lupe died, I started having these nightmares about Nilo. I'd see his eyes staring out at me in the darkness as I slept. In fact, I started sleeping with the lights on after that. There's more I could tell you, but I dare not dwell on any more of the details. I'm gonna have to stay up all night anyway, because I know Nilo will haunt my dreams if I don't. I guess that's the sacrifice I have to make.
Granddad used to tell us ghost stories when we went camping. And without fail, he'd scare us kids so bad that we wouldn't sleep a wink. He'd stoke up the campfire and spin yarns about ghost trains and lost Indian tribes, tell us tales of phantom lovers searching the woods for one another, tales of the Bigfoot-like creature who eats all the catfish from the lake. But the story that sticks with me most is the curse of Settlers Point.
The Littlest Angel, from a true story submitted by UT Catmom. Narrated by Jen, co-host of Our True Crime Podcast.
In the 1780s, several families, Scotch-Irish immigrants, fur trappers mostly, set down roots in the foothills outside the trading posts that would one day become my hometown. They had everything they needed to survive and prosper. Decades passed. Then, around the turn of the century, they built Grace Chapel, the first permanent church in Settlers Point. Now, this community of farmers and trappers was too small to have its own preacher. So for years, they'd share preachers with small churches and nearby communities. Settlers Point had a tendency to draw fire and brimstone preachers, each one partial to Old Testament wrath and New Testament revelation. Then, in 1938, during the Great Depression, Reverend Jubal Trent was asked to become the first permanent minister at Grace Chapel. It was said that Reverend Trent's sermons were fiery and full of bloody gore. By all accounts, though, his congregation loved it so much they would have sopped it up with a biscuit. But all that changed after a series of dalliances between Reverend Trent and the daughter of a respected tobacco farmer. The good Reverend put a baby in her belly, and when the poor girl's father found out, he had Reverend Trent beaten half to death and run out of town. And according to Granddad's story, Reverend Trent put a curse on the town as he left.
By God, this town will drown in blood before the solstice comes.
That year brought with it a fulfillment of the Reverend's awful curse. The low temperatures that winter shattered records, and it seemed the thaw would never come. Farmers had to sow crops late into the growing season. What crops were planted fell victim to a mysterious blight. Many families scraped and starved that year. Banks foreclosed on farms, and people were left penniless after generations of prosperity. What's more, a strain of flu burned its way through Settlers Point, killing off half of the very young and most of the very old. Old-timers like Granddad claimed that the townspeople went to church every Sunday and prayed for relief from their misfortune. Whenever he told the story, Granddad would say that even if God sent down the littlest angel to help him, it'd be a blessing. No such blessing came. A year later to the day, a lumber mill worker who lived in a holler several miles below Settlers Point saw two girls no older than 11 or 12 stumbling down from the mountain. They were wearing rags that were soaked from head to foot with blood. They were hysterical and babbled about demons who swarmed the city and slaughtered everyone in sight. They left none alive. It was a miracle these girls managed to escape the demon's scrutiny. The man who found them obviously didn't believe their story, but he called the sheriff anyway. The sheriff and a handful of deputies made their way up the lonely mountain road. And when they got to Settlers Point, they found a massacre the likes of which they'd only read about in westerns. Women and children lay slaughtered in the unpaved streets. The ground was black and sticky with blood and gore. A handful of men had been butchered and lashed to trees and signposts. The FBI became involved in the investigation, but quickly lost interest when no link to any famous gangsters could be established. Still, they managed to determine that all, or nearly all of those poor people, were killed with some sort of unidentifiable high-caliber firearm. A firearm powerful enough to obliterate human tissue into dust. No one ever came to live there again. Properties were foreclosed on, and the whole town was left in the woods to deteriorate. In the decades since the massacre, the woods have grown up around it, so much so that you can hardly tell there was ever a town up there. But according to Granddad, if you know where to look, it's easy enough to find the cursed ruins of Settlers Point. Pretty neat story, huh? Especially for around the campfire. I mean, I've spent many restless nights under the stars haunted by Granddad's tale. And like all good campfire stories, it has a basis in fact. There is a real Settlers Point, a small town deserted after a real massacre. Now, I don't know about a curse or about demons, but everything else happened just as Granddad said. Me and my friends in high school used to load up the car and drive around looking for the abandoned mountain road that led to the ghost town. We never found it, though we spent many autumn nights trying, back when I was doing my master's coursework. I'm a social worker now. I wrote a paper once on the sociological effects of violence in small communities. I chose Settlers Point as my subject. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the historical bits I dug up. However, I did find the exact location of Settlers Point's ruins. During spring break of that year, I traveled back home with my boyfriend, and we set aside a day to go backpacking up there. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you something important. The campfire tale that my granddad told us was that the preacher was run out of town, and he'd cursed the town that he left. But, according to my research, he was beaten to death by an angry mob right there on the steps of the church, possibly uttering the curse as he lay dying. This version of the event comes from an account published in the county newspaper. A friend of mine in law school combed through some of the vintage police records, but couldn't find any charges filed in relation to this murder. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, the ruins. Okay. So, me and my boyfriend, we backpacked up to Settlers Point. It was much farther from my hometown than I expected. In fact, it was about sundown when we got all the way up there. And the town was much smaller than I thought. I mean, maybe a bunch of buildings had been raised, but what we saw looked like nothing more than a tiny general store and a church. I say church, but it really was just a one-room chapel. It was the only building we stepped inside because the building shared by the general store and post office and the one home still standing were in such bad shape we thought just by stepping inside we might cause the whole thing to crumble. The church was a much more solid structure. When we found it, there was a young poplar growing straight up through a hole in the roof. A carpet of weeds and sticker bushes covered the warped, uneven timbers of the floor. The stone walls looked all hairy with moss and ivy. It was an eerie place. The whole time I was inside, I couldn't stop thinking that a man was lynched on the steps of this very building. After that, we explored the surrounding area in widening circles. We found a handful of deserted homes, monuments to abandoned lives. An eerie sense of sadness hung about the whole place. We set up our tents not far from the remnants of Settlers Point. We weren't brave enough to actually camp inside the town. It was a wild, restless night for sure. I kept dreaming that the ghost of Reverend Trent was lingering just outside our campsite. If the wind blew or a leaf or a twig dropped on our tent, I imagined it was his blood dripping into the rainfly. Well, now we can fast forward to about a week and a half later. I managed to track down the name of a woman who lived in Settlers Point during the Depression. She was way up in her 90s and was in hospice care in Knoxville. Her name was Eunice Baumgartner, and she would have been just a little tiny girl at the time of the massacre. Now, I know what you're thinking. Not many people would have gone to such lengths for a master's project, and I'm no private detective. But let's just say I knew some people who could pull some strings. Anyway, I spoke to Eunice's daughter and arranged to visit the old lady at her bedside. We spoke for a long time between her naps. She was fairly well sedated. A lot of our little talk was about UT football and raising tomatoes, so I won't bore you with a blow-by-blow replay of our conversation. Well, with a little prodding from her daughter, who's pretty much an old lady herself. Eunice told me a little bit about her time at Settlers Point. Apparently, more people survived it than the legend would imply. She wasn't one of the blood-spattered little girls who came off the mountain, but Eunice said she did know both of them from church. I asked her about Reverend Trent. She said she really didn't remember him and was, of course, not there when he was beaten to death. But she did say that she remembered seeing red stains on the church step and asking her daddy about it. He told her that this old hobo had come into town and cleaned and gutted some trout right there on the steps before someone ran him off. Eunice said she never did believe this story. She became less lucid as her meds started to kick in, but she repeatedly said that things were bad in Settlers Point, with people just barely scraping by. We prayed and prayed for a little angel to come out and put an end to all this struggle and misery, she said. She also said that people were praying to be cleansed of the sins that Reverend Trent had infected the town with. Eunice's doctor was planning on visiting soon, so I kind of hastily asked about the massacre. She became visibly pissed off when I asked her these questions, but she answered them as best she could. She said she was walking home from the dime store when the strangers came into town. That's what she called them. Strangers. They were all beautiful, like movie stars, except they were dressed awfully peculiar. Eunice said she walked past one of them and remembered thinking his eyes were black. How many of them were there? Were they all men, I asked. They were so beautiful, she said, looking at a point somewhere on the ceiling. Then she looked back at me with an expression on her face that was so crooked. I thought she might be having a stroke. We lived a good piece outside town, she said. I was halfway home before I heard the booming gunshots. Booming and screaming. Screamed just like the lake of fire. She said this as she began to doze off again. I had to ask her one last question while she was still awake. Eunice, I asked, do you believe that those strangers were demons? Demons, she replied. They weren't demons. Child, we prayed them there.
There's a god in the pool behind my house. At least, I thought it was a god.
It arrived near the end of October, in the dead of night. While the neighborhood slept, Harper was awakened by the sound of something hitting the window. Tossing off his covers, he jumped to his feet and looked outside to a world illuminated by starlight. There on the ground, a twitching pile of jet-black feathers lay writhing. Harper mistook the thing for a crow or a raven at first. After all, it wasn't the first time a bird had smashed into the window. Harper, still half asleep, thought about helping it. And then it began to scream. A call, a death rattle, a prayer to eternity to end its misery. But as seconds passed, the raspiness of its cry began to fade while the volume only grew. Its cadence changed to something resembling the horn of a train getting closer. The grass around the creature decayed to create the outline of a perfect triangle, and Harper became fixated on its eyes and how they reflected the light from the moon. One could hear flesh and feathers starting to tear open along the pitiable beast's back. The sky provided just enough clarity to make out what Harper would come to wish he'd never seen. Hands, several of them. Each digit on each hand writhing and wriggling like a tadpole that had found itself on land. After a few moments of struggle, the hand touched earth and began to drag themselves, the feathered carcass and Harper's horrified attention, toward the decrepit swimming pool. Its fingers now moved in a rhythmic pattern more commonly associated with the feet of a millipede. The joints made a wet, crackling sound, while the hole from where the hands had been birthed sputtered some dark, heavy liquid. The creature made its way under the fence surrounding the abandoned above-ground pool. It stopped at the edge of the pool and positioned its hands in a circle below its torn, feathered body, pushed it upward. Long, sickly arms with spider-like joints revealed themselves as the body continued its ascent higher into the evening air. It pushed its body up just enough to flop into the pool, and Harper lost sight of it.
Don't ask me why, because I don't know myself, but I went after it. I put on a jacket and socks and shoes, no hesitation. I brought a flashlight, but I didn't really need it. The moon and stars were bright that night, and I went to get a closer look. I should have been scared, but I felt safe. More safe than I'd felt perhaps ever before in my life.
Harper didn't go out to the pool much. No one did. It had come with the house, in dire need of repair, but at the bottom of a long list of other things that needed urgent fixing. The pool was always considered a problem for another time. Just a few steps into the yard, and Harper was chilled down to his very marrow. But when he peered over the edge of the water, he felt warmer just looking at the thing. Its bony arms were hidden away once again, and it crawled around on the surface.
I could get a better look at its wings now. They were huge.
But shattered, so it used its many hands to move. It wasn't cold enough for ice, but Harper had to touch the surface to fully understand what he was seeing. The pool was still liquid, putrid, stagnant water, but the celestial creature before him crawled on the surface as if it were solid. Harper said hello to it.
I was trying to break the ice. Get it?
The creature, unsurprised by Harper's presence, didn't stop what it was doing. When it finally spoke, it used the boy's own voice.
Hello, child. Be not afraid. You sound just like me.
That must have been scary, unnerving, any of those things, right?
No. It was exciting. I asked it what it was doing.
No, the first question Harper asked was, why are you walking on the water? But then Harper asked what really should have been the first question. What are you?
By then, my eyes had adjusted more to the night, and I was able to see the thing more clearly.
Yes, it had the head of a bird, but it looked more like an eagle than a raven. Its eyes reflected the moon like the eyes of a cat. Its body was long and snake-like to accommodate its many hands, and the viscous liquid that had been leaking out where the arms popped out had finally slowed to a trickle. It was like the creature was wearing the carcass of a bird as a disguise.
I'm an angel,
he said.
I decided that it was a he because he sounded like me.
Of course, real angels are neither male nor female.
But I didn't know that. I'm just a kid.
Angel. Written especially for Octoberpod by Annie Morgan, co-creator of the podcast Inside Your House. From an original idea by Madeline Zaytsoff, narrated by Edward October, and starring Arthur Williams, co-host of Family Plot Podcast, as Harper.
Anyway, finding out what he was didn't surprise me at all. I felt just so safe around him, so drawn to him.
That's why Harper told the angel he'd help him however he could. And then the angel told Harper to help him hide. He said he was trying to catch a frog or a tadpole. And then he finally opened his eyes. All of them. They dotted his entire body. Some large and bulging, some little more than pinpricks, some partially obscured behind feathers, but all of them glowing and flashing the most awful colors.
I'm running out of time, so hurry, quickly. Go into your house, grab something sharp, whatever is closest, and meet me back out here,
he said. And so Harper came back out, with a kitchen knife in hand.
This lovely, bright, beautiful creature needed my help, and I wanted to help it, no matter what.
Such an accommodating child.
I need you to cut yourself. Not deep, just enough to spill some blood in the water.
Without hesitation, the boy sliced his hand. Because that's what they do in the movies for things like this. Important things. Blood oaths and the like. Harper watched the red liquid, which looked black under the night sky, drip, drip, drip into the water. It was instantaneous. The angel sank, and only just in time, too. The second he was completely submerged, sirens cried out in the distance. It was a sound similar to the screech the angel had made when he first fell into the yard.
Only this time, I felt afraid.
Harper hid next to the dented plastic poolside and didn't dare to speak or even breathe. Something was coming. Had it not been the middle of the night, and had it not been coming from the wrong direction, he would have thought it was the sun. All he saw was fire. He closed his eyes, praying for it to pass. Surely helping the angel would amplify his prayers. Something flew above him, but it was so bright it hurt his eyes, even with them closed. There was a rhythmic wind, something huge flapping above the house, something that must have been the size of an aeroplane. The noise it made was deafening. It was what Harper imagined the trumpets at the end of the world would sound like a tornado siren that taps directly into your worst fears and pulls them out. If the earth were to end in a nuclear apocalypse, then this might be the sound that would signal the bombs. This was the sound of the end times. Then it was gone. Harper didn't open his eyes for a long time. A long time. It felt like an eternity. He was afraid he'd wake up in a void. But when he finally did, he was still in the yard, still up against the lip of the pool. He stood to check on his new friend and saw the water steaming. But there at the bottom was the angel.
I began to think of him as mine then, because I'd save him, and I wanted him to save me.
He rose up from the bottom. The black gore around his hands washed off into the pool, mixing with Harper's blood and the blood of a few frogs that now floated dead on the surface.
Thank you, child. You've done something miraculous today. Now go back to sleep.
The next day, all of the frogs and tadpoles were gone from the pool, and the water looked clearer. Though lit by the sunrise, it was blood red. Harper saw his angel in the light for the first time then, and he asked the boy if he could help him accomplish his mission. But now his voice had a gravelier, almost phlegmy quality. It sounded like Harper whenever he was sick. The phrase, frog in the throat, comes to mind.
And it had made me wonder where they had all gone. The frogs, I mean.
To that question, the angel simply explained that on Earth, angels have to eat, something that he'd need Harper's help doing. As the sun rose higher, Harper could see that his new friend's wounds had healed, and his arms now slid effortlessly from the holes in his feathered hide, extending and retracting as he used them to swim. His extra eyes, which he kept secret, were closed most of the time. His feathers were dark brown in the daylight, with bits of gold sprinkled throughout, and his face was now hawk-like. He instructed the boy in a voice that now sounded more like sick than like Harper, and told him to catch him some flies to eat today, so that he could try and heal his wings. Harper made honey traps with coffee cups, and scattered them out on the seldom-used part of the lawn. But being so late in the year, he worried that the bugs might not be biting. But his angel assured him that there was a heat wave coming, and the bugs would be all right. The angel was soon proven right. Coming up out of the grass were dozens of flies buzzing around. These little traps accumulated countless flies, mosquitoes, gnats, and other assorted creepy crawlies, which Harper dumped into the water, washing the writhing masses into the pool. The water had stayed red, but not as bold a red as it had been in the sun. Harper marveled at the fact that angels could bleed, too.
There was something so satisfying about knowing my blood was mixing with his, like I would become holier by association. I wanted to ask my angel if he'd help me, because I'd helped him, help me be forgiven for my sins.
And so, Harper asked the angel that very thing. The angel assured the boy that he'd give the master his highest recommendation on all matters of sin and forgiveness. Then he released the boy from his service for the remainder of the day.
I worried less, knowing that he was well fed and healing.
It was a golden afternoon that day, and had the trees not already shed their leaves, one would have sworn it was summer, but there was death in the air. Harper could smell it the second he stepped outside. Then death's presence was confirmed by the hushed and anguished conversations coming from next door. Harper peered over the fence and saw his neighbors, the entire family, huddled around the chicken coop. The kids were distraught, the adults mad. The boy yelled over the fence to see if everyone was okay, only to find out that something had gotten into the neighbor's chicken coop. They'd had 6 chickens. All were now dead. Harper went to the edge of the property, trying to get a look at the chickens. What he saw was covered in flies. Still, it was gruesome enough to make him feel ill. The next time he saw the angel, it was the first thing he spoke of.
Our property was big enough that I didn't have to worry about my neighbors overhearing me, even in the daylight. Also big enough that we didn't have to smell that chicken coop. Very often, anyway. I talked to my angel about it as he swam laps in the pool.
The angel was now able to swim while holding his wings up out of the water. Harper told the angel about the flies, told him that there were so many flies on the chickens, it looked almost as if the flies had slaughtered them.
No, child, it's something much worse, I'm afraid.
He now sounded nothing like Harper, which made the boy sad.
He must be using his real voice now.
There's a terrible plague coming, but I can't do anything about that. I just need you to bring me eggs.
And Harper did as he was told. He snuck into the chicken coop as soon as it got dark and grabbed as many as he could find. The dead chickens had been moved, but there were still piles of flies feasting on the blood and gore left behind.
I got out of as fast as I could. Looking at it still made me feel sick.
When Harper dumped the eggs in the pool, he figured that the angel was probably going to eat them, so he decided not to stick around.
The idea of an angel having to eat food the same way we do made me feel strange.
Yes, eating does seem like a vulgar act, an act somehow beneath the likes of an angel. Harper had never felt so sick as he did the next morning. He had red spots all over his body, and as the day wore on, they opened up into bloody sores. He waited until his parents left for work. Then he went to the pool. The boy's throat was so raw he could hardly speak, but without even croaking out the words, "Help me," the angel said,
My child, of course I will help.
Harper wanted to ask the angel if he could heal him, and as if he'd heard the boy's thoughts, the angel said,
I can do better than heal you. I can baptize you.
The angel led Harper to the pool. The boy dragged himself up the ladder using the very last of his strength, then splashed in. The angel caught Harper with his long, long arms, dotted with glowing, madly staring eyes. Some slitted like the eyes of a cat. and held the boy close.
Think of all your sins,
He said.
So, I thought of cheating off Becky Rogers in my math class. I thought of stealing a bunch of Red Bulls from 7-Eleven. But worst of all, I thought of my little sister Elizabeth. I thought about babysitting her. I thought about letting her go to her friend Sarah's house across the street. Mom and Dad let her do that all the time. I thought about how I should have walked her there. I held her hand, maybe. I thought of how if I'd just stayed with her long enough, I could have seen the car coming. I thought of being forgiven. Forgiven by my parents, first of all. And then being forgiven by Jesus. I thought of all the bad thoughts I'd had because of the things they'd said to me. I thought about getting into heaven now, when I'd been planning on ending up in hell for so long.
The angel lowered the boy down. The water was warm and smelled of copper. It splashed away all of Harper's sores and healed his skin. And when he pulled the boy out, he was like brand new. The next day, Harper went over to his pool, but before he did, his mother told him to be careful in the yard. It was the first time she'd spoken to him in quite a while. The boy was happy. There was a storm brewing, and Harper worried about the angel being alone in the cold, but the angel said he only needed one last thing from him, and he'd be all healed up. He said he needed to be set free. He said he couldn't leave the pool without Harper's permission. Well, Harper rushed to the shed to get an axe. A nice sturdy hatchet. They still had hours of daylight left, but the storm clouds were so intense it looked like twilight was approaching. Without hesitation, he chopped the side of the pool. Water rushed out, and the boy hurried to demolish one side utterly.
It felt good to destroy something.
The angel slipped through the hole in the pool with the gushing water and shook himself off. Water flooded the yard then, and Harper's parents began yelling something from inside the house. But the wind stole their words. The first splashes of rain started. The angel stood to his glorious full height, and for the first time Harper saw his wings unfurl. There were 6, but though they weren't broken anymore, the feathers were falling off. The angel flapped his wings, shaking off the remaining feathers like a November wind, stripping naked the boughs of their most stubborn autumn leaves. The boy's parents were running outside now as the sky darkened, yelling at Harper to get away, but the boy only yelled back,
"Don't worry, he's an angel."
The feathers were now fully gone, exposing leathery bat-like wings beneath. Harper hoped his angel was okay. His face was changing now, too, the eyes on either side of his nose growing farther apart and burning like coals of fire, with new ones sprouting up all over his strange body. The rain was falling faster now, faster, and the boy held up his hand to shield himself from the raindrops, which streamed down his face and were deep red. Blood. It was raining blood. Harper fell to his knees in total shock as drops of crimson fell from the sky and colored the world with its awful stain.
Thank you for helping me change. I'll put in a good word.
The angel, tall and magnificent yet terrible as heartache, stepped between Harper and his parents. Someone began screaming next door, and then all at once the screams could be heard everywhere. Harper looked up, his eyes stinging from the hot rain of blood, and saw, through a gap in the clouds, that the moon was out, and around it the stars. It was 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Harper's angel, his beast, whatever it was, now stepped up to Harper's parents and spoke using all the voices of the damned.
Be afraid.
It's intermission time, folks. I'm your host, Mr. Edward October. The devil, demons, dark rituals, and witchcraft. This episode is filthy with all that stuff. Nothing whips up a hysterical moral panic quite like witchcraft, and nobody does a witch hunt like old New England. And so between the acts of Octoberpod, I thought I'd take us back to the original satanic panic that swept this nation while it was still in its infancy. The extraordinary delusion, recorded as Salem Witchcraft, was but a reflection of a kindred insanity in the old world that was not extirpated until its victims had been counted by thousands. That human beings should be accused of leaguing themselves with Satan to plague their fellows and overthrow the powers of righteousness is remarkable, but that they should admit their guilt is incomprehensible, albeit the history of every popular delusion shows that weak minds are so affected as to lose control of themselves, and that a whimsy can be as epidemic as smallpox. Salem and Other Witchcraft, and Satan's Burial Place. From the 1886 edition of Myths and Legends of Our Own Land, Volume 1, by Charles Montgomery Skinner. Narrated by Edward October. Such was the case in 1692, when the witchcraft madness, which might have been stayed by a seasonable spanking, broke out in Danvers, Massachusetts, the first victim being a wild Irishwoman named Glover, and speedily involved the neighboring community of Salem. The mischiefs done by witches were usually trifling, and it never occurred to their prosecutors that there was an inconsistency between their pretended powers and their feeble deeds, or that it was strange that those who might live in regal luxury should be so wretchedly poor. Aches and pains, blights of crop, disease of cattle, were all charged to them. Children complained of being pricked with thorns and pins, and if hysterical girls spoke the name of any feeble old woman, while in flighty talk, they virtually sentenced her to die. The word of a child aged 11 years sufficed to hang, burn, or drown a witch. Giles Corey, a blameless man of 80, was condemned to have his body crushed beneath a load of rocks and timbers. He refused to plead in court, and when the beams were laid upon him, he only cried, "More weight." The shade of the unhappy victim haunted the scene of his execution for years, and always came to warn the people of calamities. Gallows Hill near Salem witnessed many sad tragedies, and the old elm that stood on Boston Common until 1876 served as a gallows for witches and Quakers. The accuser of one day was the prisoner of the next, and not even the clergy were safe. When the wife of Philip English was arrested, he too asked to share her fate, and both were, through friendly intercession, removed to Boston, where they were allowed to have their liberty by day on condition that they would go to jail every night. Just before they were to be taken back to Salem for trial, they went to church and heard the Reverend Joshua Moody preach from the text, "If they persecute you in one city, flee unto another." The good clergyman not only preached goodness, but practiced it. And that night the door of their prison was opened. Furnished with an introduction from Governor Phipps to Governor Fletcher of New York, they made their way to the settlement and remained there in safe and courteous keeping until the people of Salem had regained their senses, at which time they returned. Mrs. English died soon after from the effects of cruelty and anxiety, and although Mr. Moody was generally commended for his substitution of sense and justice for law, there were bigots who persecuted him so constantly that he removed to Plymouth. According to the belief of the time, a witch or wizard compacted with Satan for the gift of supernatural power, and in return was to give up his soul to the evil one after his life was over. The deed was signed in blood of the witch, and horrible ceremonies confirmed the compact. Satan then gave his ally a familiar in the form of dog, ape, cat, or other animal, usually small and black, and sometimes an undisguised imp. To suckle these familiars with blood of a witch was forbidden in English law, which ranked it as a felony. But they were thus nourished in secret, and by their aid the witch might raise storms, blight crops, abort births, lame cattle, topple over houses, and cause pains, convulsions, and illness. If she desired to hurt a person, she made a clay or waxen image in his likeness, and the harms and indignities wreaked upon the puppet would be suffered by the one bewitched, a knife or needle thrust into the waxen body being felt acutely by the living one, no matter how far distant he might be. By placing this image in running water, hot sunshine, or near a fire, the living flesh would waste as this melted or dissolved, and the person thus wrought upon would die. This belief is still current among practitioners of voodoo superstitions in the South. The witch, too, had the power of riding winds, usually with a broomstick for a conveyance, after she had smeared the broom or herself with magic ointment, and the flocking of the unhallowed to their Sabbaths in snaky bogs or on lonely mountain tops has been described minutely by those who claim to have seen the sight. Sometimes they cackled and gibbered through the night before the houses of the clergy, and it was only at Christmas that their powers failed them. The meetings were devoted to wild and obscene orgies, and the intercourse of fiends and witches begot a progeny of toads and snakes. But the belief in witches did not die even when the Salem people came to their senses. In the Merrimack Valley, the devil found converts for many years after. Goody Mose of Rock's Village, who tumbled downstairs when a big beetle was killed at an evening party some miles away, after it had been bumping into the faces of the company. Goody Witcher of Amesbury, whose loom kept banging day and night after she was dead. Goodman Nichols of Rock's Village, who spelled a neighbor's son, compelling him to run up one end of the house along the ridge and down the other end, troubling the family extremely by his strange proceedings. Susie Martin, also of Rocks, who was hanged in spite of her devotions in jail, though the rope danced so that it could not be tied. And Goody Morse of Market and High Streets, Newburyport, whose baskets and pots danced through her house continually, and who was seen flying about the sun as if she had been cut in twain, or as if the devil did hide in the lower part of her. The hill below Easton, Pennsylvania, called Hexenkopf, Witch's Head, was described by the German settlers as a place of nightly gathering for weird women who whirled about its top in linked dances and sang in deep tones mixed with awful laughter. After one of these women, in Williams Township, had been punished for enchanting a $20 horse, their Sabbaths were held more quietly. Mom Wrinkle, whose rock is pointed out beside the Wissahickon in Philadelphia, drank dew from acorn cups and had the evil eye. Juan Perea of San Mateo, New Mexico, would fly with his chums to meetings in the mountains in the shape of a fireball. During these sallies, he left his own eyes at home and wore those of some brute animal. It was because his dog ate his eyes when he had carelessly put them on a table that he had always afterward worn those of a cat. Within the present century, an old woman who lived in a hut on the Palisades of the Hudson was held to be responsible for local storms and accidents. Indeed, Satan appears to have troubled the early settlers in America almost as grievously as he did the German students. He came in many shapes to many people, and sometimes he met his match. Did he not try to stop Peter Stuyvesant from rowing through Hell Gate on moonlight night? And did not that old soldier put something at his shoulder that Satan thought must be his wooden leg? But it wasn't a leg, it was a gun that had been charged home with prayer. Peter fired, and the missile whistled off towards Island, where 3 boys found it afterward and swapped it for double handfuls of donuts and bullseyes. Incidentally, it passed between the devil's ribs, and the fiend exploded with a yell and a smell, the latter of sulfur, to Peter's blended satisfaction and alarm. And did not the same spirit of evil plague the old women of Massachusetts Bay and craze the French and Spaniards in the South? One of the first buildings to be put up in Ipswich, Massachusetts, was a church built on a ledge upon the river. And in that church Satan tried to conceal himself for purposes of mischief. For this act he was hurled from the steeple top by some unseen instrument of righteousness, with such force that his hoof mark was stamped into a solid stone nearby. This did not deter him from mounting to the ridgepole and assuming a defiant air, with folded arms, when Whitefield began to preach. But when that clergyman's tremendous voice was loosed below him, he bounced into the air in terror and disappeared. The Shakers report that in the waning of the 18th century, they chased the evil one through the coverts of Mount Sinai, Massachusetts, and just before dawn of a summer morning they caught and killed and buried him. Shakers are spiritualists, and they believe that their numbers to have been augmented by the distinguished dead, among whom they already number Washington, Lafayette, Napoleon, and even Pocahontas. The first 2 named of these posthumous communers are still seen by members of the faith who pass Satan's grave at night, for they sit astride of white horses and watch the burial spot, lest the enemy of man arise and begin anew his career of trouble. And so it goes. And so ends our intermission. Better grab a refill on your coffee or soda and one more hand of chocolate-covered goobers, because Act 2 of our Satanic Panic Extravaganza starts now.
So when I was younger, there was a time I spent serving as a member of a new Mennonite church. Hard to believe now, but back then I very much wanted to become a youth minister and empower children. And for a time it worked. I did believe in it. Truly, I reflected a lot on Jesus' teachings about loving and how that was our job, to love and to never harm and hurt. And that through the power of our Lord, all monsters would bow to his holy light. Monsters. When you think of monsters, what do you see? Teeth like a knife rack? Eyes the color of amber? Perhaps it's a translucent specter or a cosmic horror, or any number of ghastly ghoulies you picture when you browse the media of pulp horror. When I think of monsters, I think about khaki pants and Bibles. Anyways, this story all started with a rumor about a basement in a church. Growing up in the early 2000s, I attended a church called Kris, and rumor had it the youth group was doing weird shit in the basement. Now, at the time, I was super closeted because, well, I'm sure you can guess why. But still, I was seeing a guy named John who gave me all the details. Apparently, one of John's close friends cut off all communications with him, and John wanted to know why. After some investigation, turns out the kid didn't want to associate with sinners. Let's just be blunt, he meant us queers, and John said this wasn't like him at all. Some time passed and I didn't think much of it until John showed up at the coffee shop a few of us hung out at. He told us what I've told you, that the youth group was doing weird shit in the basement, but to queer kids exclusively. John, being John, wanted to find out more. Now, most of us, yours truly as well, didn't really believe the rumor. But being young, dumb, and full of terrible ideas anyways, we decided to see what was up. I don't care how old you are, by the way. Sneaking into a church at any point in time sounds fun as fuck. So, fast forward to the night that shit got weird. Held youth meetups on Friday night. This was mostly a standard gospel get-together, but with some games and shit. I, a youth minister in training at a different church, had gone before, so I kinda knew around the building a bit. Me, John, and 3 other friends first met outside. During the part of the night where everyone was in the chapel singing hymns, we snuck out to try and find our way to the basement. But once inside, we quickly realized it was a f***ing labyrinth down there. So we looked around, we saw what we could see, and turns out nothing. We came up bupkis. We looked everywhere, and it turns out that the rumors were just f***ing rumors. That relief lasted for about 5 seconds until we heard voices coming from down the hallway with no lights. Save for one creepy-ass exit sign at the very end. Creeping down the hall to a door that was open just a crack, we looked inside. The room was lit only by what I can describe as one of those tube fluorescent ceiling fixture thingies, but attached to like a rolling metal frame. We can make out about a half a dozen kids, all high school age, standing in a circle with hands clasped. Boy, girl, with one of those youth pastors of this church. All the girls were wearing those ankle-length denim skirts like the Duggar kids wear, and guys were wearing khakis and white button-down shirts. They were swaying from side to side like zombies. And there, with one light source fixed on him, was some kid strapped to a chair. The youth leader was reading from the Bible, and would occasionally say something in what I assume was Latin. And then the other kids would respond and chant. The kid strapped to the chair looked like hell, no pun intended, honestly. Not like bloody and beaten, mind you, like some cheesy cop movie, more just like worn down and tired, like a character in a Junji Ito drawing. Later on, we'd find some bruises and scratches on the kid. Originally, we hadn't planned on doing anything if we'd actually found something, but that changed in an instant when the youth leader yelled, "Do you repent homosexuality and all its temptations presented by Satan?" Something like that. I don't know. It was almost like 20 years ago. The poor kid, not able to open his eyes much because of the light, pitifully muttered, "Please, we were just holding each other. There's nothing wrong with that." And then the leader threw what looked like water, assuming holy water, in the kid's face and started the process again. And it wasn't like a little sprinkle of water either, like in The Exorcist. No, it was more like a bucket of ice water. John quietly gestured for us to retreat down the hallway. I still remember hearing muffled cries as we walked back. And then came time for us to face the moral reality of what was going on. I asked, "Guys, what are we gonna do? Should we call the cops?" John and the other 3 really didn't trust cops. And to be fair, I knew at least a few of the officers who attended the church, and complications. Churches already have a creepy cult vibe by themselves, but this place was extra. Someone suggested walking in and just seeing what happened, but that was quickly vetoed. I looked over at John, who, with the exception of the dismissing the cops, had been relatively quiet. What we hadn't noticed was that he had been rummaging through his backpack the rest of the time. He took out a cylinder, and he told us to listen. See, Jay didn't think the rumor was a small-town legend. He thought it was real. And so that beautiful bastard came up with a half-cocked plan ahead of time. I say half-cocked because there's no way any of us thought this through, and his preparations came straight from the anarchist cookbook. Jay had made a fucking smoke bomb and a mental note of where the fire alarm was. This whole next bit, by the way, is pretty chaotic. I'll try to retell it the way it happened, but it gets a little messy after this point. John reached into his bag and gave us face coverings. I remember that he put on one of those bandanas that had the teeth and the jaws of a skeleton painted on it, you know the ones. Then we ducked down and went back to the room all stealthy-like. I swear it felt like it was playing a real-life version of Metal Gear, or something equivalently ridiculous to bring up as a comparison. The ritual torture of this kid was still going on. I couldn't see it from where I was crouching, but I could still hear the youth group chanting in Latin. John was in front. I was crouched behind him with another one of our friends. The others were staked out around the corner under the fire alarm. John kind of windmilled his arm and tossed the smoke bomb into the youth group meeting room. It was the kind that's made from a ping pong ball filled with chemicals and wrapped in tinfoil that made a kind of tail. And then before anyone in the room could react, Jay slammed the door shut and held it while the room filled up with smoke. Eventually, he let go of the door and everyone came pouring out. With everyone coughing on the ground, me and one of the other guys picked up the possessed kid and started running down the hallway. And then we all booked it up the stairs, taking off our face coverings, and we ran out the fire exit. There was a youth group member chasing us. I laugh at the thought of a girl chasing someone down in one of those long denim skirts. No judgment on the skirts part, just the, chasing us part. I mean, I heard their feet pounding on the linoleum behind us, but I don't think they ever got close to catching us. Too much smoke and chaos. Too many long skirts. The church was close to a school, and that school had a little forest in the back, and since it was convenient for us to hide, we all booked it back there. I, being the good little idiot I was back then, was panicking about what had just happened. More about me and my paranoia a bit later. The others were attending to the kid that we just rescued. When we were sure we got away and could speak freely, we got more details from the kid. The stories were true, by the way. The youth group was conducting a DIY gay conversion exorcism. Poor dude mentioned that his dad caught him making out with his boyfriend, who was not a member of the church, FYI. His father told the youth pastor, and the youth pastor convinced the kid's family that he was possessed by a demon. A gay demon, presumably. Actually, it was a specific demon, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I still remember. He described it as Morax, the great Earl and Lord President of Hell, commander of 32 demonic legions. I wonder how many times he had those exact words beaten into his memory. And the worst part of all of this is that this was done with the kid's parents' blessing. To this day, I maintain the smartest man I ever met was John, my ex. By the way, it's a long story, but it is a funny one. John pretended to be this kid's boyfriend and staged a breakup in front of the parents. And so the kid himself ended up pretending to date one of John's friends, who herself was a lesbian, who was using John's friend as cover to date somebody else. It was really, I think you get the general idea, but it was pretty fucking awesome. And what of the church? Well, I'm sure as hell I wasn't gonna go back, but I had friends who attended regularly. Well, they were more like acquaintances. I keep my private life private because, gay. Anyways, they told me that the youth leader in question was no longer a member of the church after an incident in the basement. And so naturally, since we still didn't hear any more stories, we assumed the issue was resolved. We hoped. I still hope, to be honest. Oh, I almost forgot. There's a PS on this story. Remember how I said earlier that I was all paranoid about what had happened? I think I had pretty good reason. For about 3 months after that night, I felt myself being watched. There were times that I'd be crossing the street or looking out my bedroom window, and I'd see a girl wearing a heavy ankle-length denim skirt standing on the sidewalk looking, not paying attention to any of the people or the cars around her, just looking at me. Another time I saw a kid I didn't know, like he went to a different high school, dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt, walking a few paces behind me in the mall. Whenever I'd stop, he'd freeze in his tracks and pretend to look at something nearby. I met a friend for ice cream and saw that same kid standing outside in the doorway of the ice cream parlor, staring at me. And he was swaying, ever so slightly, from side to side like a zombie. On my way home from school one day, I noticed some graffiti on the back wall of a Tim Hortons. It said, "Morax lives." There was a number underneath that looked like the chapter and verse of numbers of a Bible quote. But I never looked it up, and I don't recall what it was now. Also, at that Tim Hortons, I noticed that there was a church van at all hours of the night. It was never parked in the same space, but it was always parked so that there was a direct line of sight to my house, or to, worse, my bedroom window. Like I said, this went on for several months and nothing really came of it, but if the intention was to make me frightened and paranoid, well, mission accomplished.
My name is Jason. Jason. When we were kids, a bunch of us used to ride our bikes or skateboard out to this place on the outskirts of town called the Frontier. Don't ask me why we called it that. Must have thought it was the Wild West or something. It was just an old strip mall, or shopping center, that was abandoned when the highway was rerouted, leaving this place completely bypassed. All the stores closed or moved to different locations, and the buildings were in different states of disrepair. Some units had been razed altogether, with just a footprint remaining. Others were more or less intact. More or less. The pavement and sidewalks were all cracked and ripped up, with weeds and tall grass sprouting up through the cracks. In spots, the weeds were quite high, and I remember being afraid of snakes biting me if I got too deep in the weeds. That and ticks. Ticks were also a big concern. Whatever chunks of sidewalk remained were pocked with black and green and pink splotches of chewing gum that had baked onto the cement over the years. All the kids who went there made a game of spitting gum onto the same stretches of sidewalk, like they were leaving their mark on the place. Kinda like spray painting graffiti on a bench or carving your name on a tree. It was a great place for kids to explore, much like an old cemetery, I suppose.
My name is Mindy. Mindy. I know the Frontier quite well, actually. There was a time in my life, about 3 years ago, where the bottom seemed to fall out of everything in my life. I left a toxic and abusive situation at home. And as a result, I found myself living out of my car. The Frontier was a great place to stealth camp. No CCTV anywhere nearby, not even a traffic cam. Believe me, I looked. No security, and I think I only saw a cop patrolling the area once or twice out of all the times I parked there for the night. There weren't any unhoused people there, aside from me. There weren't even any tweakers who came around. My biggest worry, well, almost my biggest, was the kids who came around to explore, skate, do rail grinds, shit like that. I usually parked in places the skaters and explorers didn't care about, and so they never bothered me. The only thing that I was afraid of in the Frontier was him.
The Frontier, written especially for Octoberpod by Annie Morgan, from an original idea by Edward October, narrated by Ari Shey and Matt Johnson.
I thought it was funny. Hell, we all did. The first time we saw him. We were popping wheelies and shit in front of the old record store when we saw him, silhouetted against the setting sun. He was on a ridge, or the top of a hill, way out on the edge of the property. He was standing on a chunk of sidewalk that would have led to the parking garage that was bulldozed to the ground a long time ago. We weren't sure what we were looking at first because, well, you just don't expect anyone to be doing what he did. It just didn't make any goddamn sense.
I was disgusted, but the first time I saw him do it, I hadn't even been living out of my car for that long, but I already felt like I'd seen it all. To be honest, I was just relieved. He seemed to have something to focus on besides me. Living out of your car is different as a woman. You looked at every man as a possible threat. Hell, maybe the men looked at each other that way too, always on edge and ready for danger. I don't know. But I remember thinking, at least he's keeping his pants on.
We all stopped what we were doing. The frontier was isolated enough that we never really got homeless people out there. This random bum was an anomaly, and we wanted to see what he was up to. Against the red and orange clouds, we watched him slowly browsing along the sidewalk, looking down. I thought he might be looking for loose change, or aluminum cans to sell, or something.
I remember it was a beautiful day the first time I saw him. The skater kids had ended up closer to my spot than I liked, but I parked in the best spot to watch the sunset and figured I'd move afterward if I had to. They'd noticed him as well, and for a few brief moments, everything was quiet.
He spent forever digging around in one spot, and we wanted to see what he'd found. This one guy, Freddie, was probably the loudest and the most fearless in our group. And because of that, we'd always kinda listen to what he said. He was almost our leader because no one else was as loud as him. That's what leadership was when we were kids. Freddie yelled out, "Let's get him!" And I don't know what he meant exactly, what he wanted to do, but when your friends all start running toward a homeless guy, you run with them. It's that dumb pack mentality that teenagers have.
I remember being worried about him, about what the skater kids were planning. They seemed nice enough, but teenage boys could be a nightmare when they put their minds to it.
He didn't do anything when we all ran up, and some of the guys took that as an insult. They started yelling at him, and he just stood there, messing with whatever he'd found on the ground. We got close to him, but I stopped near the back. I wouldn't admit it then, but I was scared.
I kept a cheap flip phone on me, just for emergencies. I had 911 dialed up, just in case. I was wary of my fellow unhoused people, but I also knew how easy it was to hurt us and not get into any trouble for it. I immediately felt a sense of solidarity with this man because of that.
It was like he didn't even hear us, didn't even realize we were there. When we got close enough, we saw, to our disgust, he was ripping up a pile of gum we'd spat onto the concrete. It was coming out in a clump, growing lighter and pinker as he stretched it off the ground. He was using his filthy fingernails, and it was coming up in a globby mess. When he finally had a chunk ripped away, he showed the first sign of emotion. He looked happy. Then, without any hesitation, he shoved the stale gumwad in his mouth and started chewing.
Ever see that Goya painting, Saturn devouring his son? The dude looked like that, except it was a mouthful of rancid chewing gum instead of human flesh. I couldn't help but laugh when these tough skater boys all ran away squealing. I hope they'd learned a little lesson about trying to mess with people who are down on their luck. I mean, untreated mental illness is no joke, and you see plenty of it on the street.
Freddie ran, so we all ran too. If Freddie the Fearless didn't want to deal with this guy, then none of us could handle him. We were old enough to think we were hot shit, but young enough to know when something was too weird for us. And none of us gave Freddy any crap for running away.
I didn't run away, but I did decide to move my car for the night. There was a Walmart not too far away, and I knew the right places to park without getting the knock late at night from some overzealous security guard. Apart from the obvious mental instability on display, there was something else off about him. The first thing I noticed was that he didn't really dress like he was unhoused, which was strange. It's hard to stay neat and tidy with little or no access to things like showers and clean laundry, but his outfit, mismatched as it was, looked fairly clean. He was dressed almost like an old-timey preacher, like if a fire and brimstone preacher cobbled together his Sunday suit from a Goodwill donation bin. And he was younger than you would expect from someone so far gone. I mean, he looked old, like a man in his 50s with a haggard, patchy beard and scraggly hair. But the lines on his face came from hard living, from a life spent smiling too little and squinting too much at the sun, but not from old age.
After that, we made a game, messing with the bubblegum man. Like, who could get closest to him whenever he came by, which wasn't all that often. But because we knew there was a chance he'd be watching us, it kind of felt like he was always there, you know? I tried to stay out of it as much as I could. That is, unless Freddy wanted me to tag along with him. I could never say no to Freddy.
I was living out of my beat-up 2012 Hyundai Accent. It was a hatchback, and surprisingly roomy with the seats laid down. I always tried to park far away from the bubblegum man. That's what those boys started calling him. He had a talent for sneaking up on you. The frontier wasn't too far from town, but there were woods all along the back, and really there wasn't any reason for anyone to be out there. Still, there were plenty of places to hide, and he always seemed to find me. I cooked meals on a little Coleman camp stove, and I'd be stirring some instant noodles, listening to the birds at sundown. And all of a sudden, I'd hear some abstract and weirdly specific criticism out of nowhere. Things like, "The shrimp counts," "Mend your clothes," or "You never share your grapes," from right behind me.
After a while, we weren't really scared of him, just more cautious. We'd make fun of him because he'd always pop up muttering things that didn't make sense. When summer ended, we spent less time skating and more time hanging out in the ruins of the old Tasty Freeze to get out of the cold a bit. Bubblegum Man would find us no matter what store we were in and tell us that the shoes aren't right. Or he'd tell us to stop swearing, but he'd do it by yelling, "Shut the hell up." If you got too close, he'd spit at you. It was pretty grody.
I felt sorry for him. And his weirdness was routine enough that I let my guard down a bit around him. Until things started to get bad, that is. As if all my problems wanted to coordinate. He started getting stranger as the weather started getting colder. Really I should have already been looking for another place to stealth camp when the leaves started falling, crazy guy or not. I had people I could have talked to, couches I could have crashed on for the winter, but to do so, I would have had to explain why I'd gotten kicked out of my house, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I still had a lot I needed to figure out for myself back then. I was bound and determined to keep up my little camping trip as long as I could. I thought that maybe I'd wait and reach out for help whenever it started snowing. You know, when I really had no other choice.
Back at school, some rumors started spreading, and Freddie picked up another nickname besides Freddie the Fearless. This one was just as alliterative, but wasn't very nice, and I won't repeat it. I asked him once if it was true, and he just winked at me. I thought about that wink for weeks. I never really stopped thinking about it, actually. The guys we used to hang out with started fading away. And soon a trip with the guys to hang out at the frontier turned into just me and Freddie hanging out at the frontier. Alone.
It's funny how you get in tune with your thoughts when you're living in the parking lot of an abandoned shopping center. I think that summer, I realized more about myself than I ever had before. It would have been kind of nice if not for what happened with the bubblegum man. The first time I realized something was really wrong was on a cloudy day. It had been about to storm, but I was enjoying the break from all the sun. I'd called one of my friends and talked just for a bit, and I felt like I was finally ready to get my life back together. Or at least try. I'd also been dodging phone calls from my mother, who was ready to forgive me, and I was not going to call her back, because I knew there wasn't anything to forgive. The bubblegum man came up to me with his mouth already moving. By then, I'd gotten used to his affinity for sidewalk gum, though I did find it strange I never saw him eating anything else. Well, not until that day. He got closer than usual, but that was okay. By this point, he knew where I slept and had never made me feel unsafe, so, hell, we were basically roommates. He liked to greet me by criticizing my clothes, even though he always wore the same tattered, albeit clean, bits of an old suit. I waited, with the kind of anticipation you reserve for a stray dog that isn't yet growling, or a guy putting his hand on your shoulder at a bar. The threat might not be there, but I was ready. He got closer, and I realized that instead of chewing gum, he had a Tootsie Pop stick jutting out of his mouth. I remember thinking, well, good for him. He's found a slightly less disgusting treat. He got closer still, and I wondered about what had driven him to this place. Underneath the dirt and the unruly beard, he didn't even look that much older than me. Then he pulled the stick out of his mouth, and I recoiled in disgust. It wasn't a Tootsie Pop stick. It was one of my used Q-tips.
One by one, our friends stopped coming to the frontier. They blamed it on the fall weather, not wanting to admit to being afraid of some dumb old man. One girl, Lisa, stopped going when he told her he knew she'd swiped her favorite notebook from the store when her mother wasn't looking. That wouldn't have been so bad if she carried the notebook with her. Maybe he was just guessing. But she kept it in her locker. He never saw it. Ricky Johnson left in the middle of a perfect sunny day because the bubblegum man told Ricky that he'd eaten his twin in the womb. I never found out if that was true or not because Ricky was too embarrassed to talk about it. One by one, the gum man would sneak up on us. We tried to stick together, but he could zero in on someone so quickly. He was so quiet, except for when he yelled out your secrets to you through a wad of recycled bubblegum. Ugh. You'd leave for just a second to take a piss against the wall, and he'd be right behind you telling you that he knew you'd lied to your mom about where you were going that day. Soon it was just me and Freddie, and the lady who lived in her car. She'd come up to us from time to time, telling us to be careful. We told her to be careful too. She was an adult and all, but she was still a girl, you know?
I knew I should have left after the Q-tip incident, but it was hard. I didn't know where else to go. I had friends, and I'd been talking to some of them, but not friends who would ever let me stay with them. If I did, I wouldn't have been living out of my car in the first place. I knew the frontier well back then, and I liked it apart from him. To be honest, the idea of fending him off stressed me out less than the idea of being at a friend's house and watching them set up dinner with one plate short, or asking me why I didn't just suck it up and apologize to my parents. My nights grew more restless, and I found more excuses to be gone during the day. But I wasn't going to leave until I had to. When the bubblegum man came up to me, I'd wave my mace at him, and he was smart enough to stay back.
Our first kiss was in Freddie's basement after we got home from the frontier. We hadn't seen the bubblegum man all day, but I think we had an unspoken agreement not to risk doing anything whenever he might sneak up on us. After that first kiss, something changed, and I was ready to stop going to the frontier. But Freddie loved it there. Truth be told, I think he liked the risk. He just liked being somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. We agreed not to tell anyone we were seeing each other, only to kiss or even hold hands when we were sure we were alone. Kids always say my parents will kill me whenever they do something they're not supposed to, but the way my father talked, I truly worried that might be literal.
When I look back at that time in my life, it just makes me more sad than anything. Not just because of the isolation, the constant fear of having nowhere to go, nowhere to belong, but because I feel like for the first time, I truly got a glimpse into how bad this world can be sometimes. And it makes me so much more grateful for how much better my life is now.
With it getting colder outside, Freddie and I worried about the car lady, but she told us she had a plan and she'd be moving on soon. I hope that was true. I hope she's all right now, wherever she is. That last weekend we were there, we didn't see her at all, and I remember being glad she'd gone and started whatever it was she set out to do. But that left us alone with the bubblegum man. I'd stopped spitting my gum out on the ground, but Freddie never did. He thought it was funny to watch the bubblegum man eat it. I thought it was sad and disgusting, but I wasn't about to disagree with Freddie on anything. He left us alone that weekend, and I started to hope that maybe he'd moved on too. That Sunday morning, I biked home from a sleepover at Freddy's. My parents had gone to church, and the house was empty. I was on my way to take a shower when I noticed the red blinking light on the answering machine. We rarely got calls on our landline. We all had cell phones by then, and almost never received answering machine messages. I pressed play, half expecting to hear the pre-recorded message of a robocaller, but when I heard the choked, hoarse voice of the bubblegum man, my heart nearly stopped beating.
Good morning, Mr. Glenn. Do you know what your son has been doing? I do. I tasted it in his spit. Tasted that boy Freddy in your son's spit. I tasted all his sins, every kind of filth. You know what disgusting things he does with that boy, even on the Sabbath. Ripped blue jeans. Disgusting. He dishonored you, and it is your duty to make it right with the Lord. It is the Lord's covenant and the commandment to you that you fix your boy. Fix your boy before he...
I listened to the message 3 more times to convince myself I wasn't having a nightmare, and then I ripped the tape out of the answering machine and shoved it in my pocket. I frantically ran up and down the stairs and looked in every room and closet in the house to make absolutely sure I was alone, and that no other soul could have possibly heard the message I just played. I started calculating when my folks would be back home, even going so far as to synchronize my watch with the clock on the stove and my flip phone. I had time. Plenty of time. Church let out right at noon, then they'd eat a late breakfast at Cracker Barrel with some people from church. They'd probably even call me to see if they could bring me back anything. But they didn't call though. Cracker Barrel bought me an hour. An hour easy. I remember running to the garage and slamming the answering machine cassette down on the workbench. I stared at it for a good minute or two before smashing it with a hammer. I thought about burning the pieces, but worried about the fumes it might give off. Instead, I cut the magnetic tape up with scissors and then used the rest of my time before my parents returned to bike to the 7-Eleven on the corner and scatter the pieces in 3 separate trash bins. I was sick to my stomach for weeks, terrified and paranoid that anyone, especially my dad, would somehow find out. I mean, if Bubblegum Man could call once, there's no reason he couldn't call again. But how did he get my number in the first place? Where did he call from? Did the car lady let him borrow her phone?
After all this time, I still think about the last time I saw the Bubblegum Man. It was still warm enough that I'd occasionally take a sponge bath in the creek behind what used to be a janky old Starbucks. It beat showering at Planet Fitness, too expensive, or at a friend's house, too embarrassing. I'd gather up my soap and shampoo and a plastic cup and was going to attempt to wash my hair. But the Bubblegum Man was in my spot. I'd caught him in the middle of disrobing. And I swear, I'm not a peeping Tom, but what I saw shocked me so much that I couldn't look away. All along his arms, his legs, his back were scars. Not just any scars either. Someone had carved words into him. I didn't get close enough to see what they were. I was frozen in place. I was scared. But more than anything, I felt for him. I was old enough to know objectively that people can do horrible things to each other. But hadn't yet seen it with my own eyes. He waded into the creek and started washing himself without soap or anything, and as he scrubbed, he drank the creek water. He started mumbling to himself as he did, as if different parts of the water were surprising him, like they were talking to him. I only caught bits of what he said. Thou shalt not covet, and thou shalt not bear false witness, and things like that. Like he was just mumbling bits and pieces of a church sermon or something. Then he slurped up a particularly large gulp of water and said simply, "Not that. Not again." I hadn't noticed his backpack right away. I was too horrified by what had been done to him. But when he reached in, he pulled out a stick with a bunch of ropes hanging off the end. He started yelling then about sins, about the horrible things he tasted in the water. And I turned away before he struck the first blow to his back. Later that day, I left for good. I'd had enough of the frontier. The thing that still bothers me, though, is that the bubblegum man had the scars from whatever words had been carved into his back. But there weren't any fresh scars from the floggings he'd been giving himself. To this day, my mind can't reconcile that.
One day, I got up the nerve to go back to the frontier on my own. I was going to find the bubblegum man and then, I don't know what, maybe beat the shit out of him. I might have even tried to kill him. I'm glad I'll never find out what I would have done, because he wasn't there. He must have picked up and moved on. I hoped I'd never see him again, and so far, I haven't. My paranoia didn't stop, though. I stopped hanging out with Freddy completely. I was so scared to be associated with him in any way. I wouldn't even look at him when we passed in the hall. His family moved back to Lexington not long after that. I never saw him again. What I did to Freddy, how I treated him, is one of the great regrets of my life. I often wonder what might have been if we'd taken things a little further. I hope he's doing okay. I hope that if he remembers me, he's able to forgive me.
One day, I drove back to the frontier after I'd gotten my life back together. I don't know what I was expecting to find there, but I wondered if I'd see him. He was gone, of course. And the frontier seemed to be even more desolate than I'd remembered.
This one Halloween, I must have been around 14 because I couldn't drive yet. I got invited to my first party where the number of girls in attendance was something I'd be interested in. In particular, there was this one girl named Heidi who I had been crushing on all year. I'm not even sure she knew I existed, but everybody else knew about my crush on her. She was dressed as Cleopatra, and she was luminous. I was dressed as Jason Voorhees. A good costume for parties like this because I could always slip off my hockey mask if any kissing needed to be done. The guys who were dressed up in zombie or werewolf makeup, they weren't so lucky. The party was being thrown by this kid a grade or two above me who lived with her dad in this old farmhouse. Her dad was a deer hunter, so there was taxidermy hanging from the walls in just about every single wood-paneled room. It was creepy. Anyway, her dad worked the third, and he'd be gone all night. And, as you might have guessed, kids started playing Truth or Dare and Spin the Bottle. At some point, I went in the kitchen for a slice of pizza, and a couple of the other girls there came up to me and said that Heidi wanted to play 7 Minutes in Heaven with me. If you never played it, 7 Minutes in Heaven is a game where you and someone of the opposite sex are put in a dark closet for 7 minutes with the assumption that you'd be making out with each other, no questions asked, for the whole time you're in there. I had my suspicions that I might be falling for a prank, but my love for Heidi was too strong. They led me to a walk-in closet, overstuffed with winter coats, told me Heidi was already waiting for me in there, and they shoved me in. There was no way to lock the closet from the outside, so someone sat against the door and blocked it with their weight. It was pitch black in there and smelled like dust and mothballs. I whispered Heidi's name, and then I felt her arms around me and her hair falling on the back of my neck. "I'm here," she whispered in my ear, and my whole body broke out in goosebumps. I felt her hands all over me, squeezing me tightly, sometimes painfully. She kept breathing, panting in my ear. It was weird, but I'm not gonna lie, I loved it. And then, someone flung the closet door open wide, flooding it with light. I saw that everybody at the party was huddled around the door, laughing at me with these big, stupid grins on their face. And to my shock, I saw that one of them was Heidi. I said, "Wait, if Heidi was out here the whole time, then who the hell was in the closet with me?" They all laughed harder and said, "No one was in there with me. That was the whole point of the prank." I turned on the closet light and searched around. Nothing but coats and shoes. My face must have turned pale because someone finally asked me what had happened. And I told them. They could tell by my expression that I wasn't putting them on. No one was laughing now. Heidi started sobbing uncontrollably. She cried so hard that she spent the rest of the party in the bathroom, throwing up.
The Rules, a stereophonic guided meditation into the unknown, written by M.J. McAddams, narrated by Edward October. Rule 1. When you enter this place, enter alone. Here you will find death waiting just over the threshold. If you must come here, let solitude be your only companion. Rule 2. Do not roam these halls by the light of day. Do this and you will damn yourself. The sun will not save you from their wrath, and if you seek their domain, it must be on their terms. When the hour is late and the sun is but a memory, you may enter. Rule 3. When the door slams behind you, and it will slam behind you, you must neither scream nor turn around. If you scream, your voice will be the first thing they take. If you turn around, well,
It's kinder not to say. Heed this warning and keep your eyes forward, your lips sealed. Rule 4. Do not listen to what they say. Do not attempt to distinguish the words within the whispers, silver tongues cutting against the silence. They will promise you everything and drown you in nothingness. They will only bring you sorrow. Rule 5. Next will come the pain. It will start from the top of your head and travel down to the tips of your toes, until each step is like walking on broken glass. Do not slow your step. Do not turn around and run. Do not open your mouth to cry in agony. That's how the demons get in. Rule 6. When the pain is gone, you must go through the door to your left. This will lead you to a room of portraits. At its center are 3 chairs. Take a seat and do not look at the pictures. Do not answer their questions. When their hands reach out from the canvas to touch you, do not flinch away. Sit and wait. He will come. Rule 7. When he arrives, stay seated, but never look away from him. You must always look upon his face. You must look upon its rotting horror, its eyes like black fire. Look away and he will take everything from you. Look away and you'll wish you had died the moment you crossed the threshold. He will take one thing from you, however. You must let him. You will not miss it in the end, and it won't be worth your soul. Rule 8. After he has taken what he needs, he will offer you 4 things: a key, a dagger, a glass of water, and one of his severed fingers. You must take only one. Take the finger and you will move forward. If you take the dagger, you must plunge it into his chest. Then you will assume his role and hold all his powers as the master of this place, a living, rotting creature of the night. The glass of water is to end this. Drink the water and you will be freed of this place, and you will forget. But you will never retrieve what you have lost. You must never take the key. Take the key, and your fate is one too cruel for words. Rule 9. If you are listening to this now, then you have taken the finger. You may proceed. He is gone now, and your eyes may journey to the portrait in front of you, but to no other. You will see it is now a door. Close your eyes and walk through. Rule 10. Keep your eyes closed and move forward to the next room. Do not look. There are things no living eyes should see. As long as you don't see them, they won't see you. Before the next door, a voice will ask you to feed it. Offer the severed digit to the voice, but say nothing in return. It will accept the finger, and then you may pass. Rule 11. Open your eyes. Rule 12. Let your eyes adjust to the dark. Allow yourself a moment to breathe. You will need to stay calm for what comes next. Rule 13. There is a door directly in front of you. You can see the shine of the doorknob now, even in the darkness. Place your hand on it and turn it. Push the door open. She is waiting for you inside. Rule 14. She is an old woman. You can only see the back of her head, a tangle of gray hair, twigs, and leaves. She will gesture for you to join her by the fire. You must oblige. Rule 15. She has no face. You mustn't scream when you realize this. You must never scream here. Your safety is in your silence. She is cooking something in the fireplace, a thick liquid in a cast iron cauldron. I will not tell you what is in it, but I won't need to. You can see the various rotting parts floating on the surface. Oh, it's best not to look for too long. Rule 16. The faceless woman will put a ladle of the broth to your lips. I'm sorry. You have to drink it. Every last drop. Spill even the smallest amount and she will slit your throat. Then you will be the one floating in the cauldron. Close your eyes and drink. Remember why you are here, what you need to retrieve. It'll be worth it in the end. You'll see. Rule 17. Good. You've managed to drink it down. She will let you live. Her gnarled fingers will gesture to the opposite side of the room. There's a long hallway waiting for you now. You must thank the woman and continue down the hall. Rule 18. The hallway seems like it will never end. It will, but it is vital that you never stop. Stop and you're dead. Stop and all this suffering was in vain. You're too close to make a mistake now. The hall will make you want to stop. You'll see them in every room, the one you came for, the one you lost. Their faces will smile at you from each of the open rooms that lines the hallway. They will call your name to tell you how much they miss you. They'll ask you to hold them, to come in and sit with them. They've waited such a long time. Don't listen. It is only this place waiting to get the better of you. Soon they won't be smiling anymore. Your loved one. They will scream and they will cry. You will see them die over and over again, just like the day you lost them. It will drive you mad. But remember, you are so close now. You are almost there. Keep going. Rule 19. The hallway has vanished. There's a winding staircase before you, cruel and twisted metal that seems to descend into hell itself. Do not be afraid. Walk down the stairs. I am waiting at the bottom. Rule 20. Step forward. You can see me now. Do not deny it. Do not run. I'm afraid it's far too late for that. Now, let me tell you the truth. I said these were the rules. I never said to trust them. I never said to trust me. You must believe that I am sorry. I see my image reflected in your eyes now. I see the way my mouth twists into what must be a grin, what would have been a grin, if I was still human. Instead, I see a mess of gray flesh and teeth made for tearing. I don't blame you when you scream. You are perfect. I can see what he took from you, but as I said before, it's nothing really. Not worth your soul. Your perfect little soul, so perfectly intact. So inviting for me to slip inside. I think I will like this new me. Rule 21. Do not move. I say this as a courtesy. It is the least I can do. If you move, it will be a pain that will stay with you until you are free of this place, and freedom is not guaranteed. I got lucky. I found you. Rule 22. You will feel something wet against your cheek, something cold. Be still. Be silent. The time for fear has passed. See? It's only my hand. Now it is yours. Rule 23.
Now you must be under the stairs. It is you who must wait in the dark. You are now the heart of this place. Here you will stay. Rule 24. Do not cry. Do not try to catch a glimpse of your reflection in my eyes. Eyes that were once your own. It's maddening, isn't it? Like watching your reflection take life. Watching it walk away forever. I remember how horrible it felt. How pitiful I was. I cried too. One last rule. This is not the end. Find someone, anyone. Call out to them in your dreams. Lure them with promises of wishes, promises of power. Whisper of fame and wealth and glory. Sing of endless love and adoration. Tell them you can even bring their loved ones back from the dead, as I have told you. You can be free. Make them trust you. Then they will be the monster writhing beneath the staircase. They will be the damned one, and you will be free to start life anew. Make them do it. Make them want to listen. Make them follow the rules.
Stick around after the credits for a brief message from some of our favorite podcasters, creators, and friends. There may even be some bloopers, outtakes, and bonus content as well. You have been listening to Octoberpod. Octoberpod is produced, edited, and directed by Edward October. The series co-producers are Amber Jordan, Whitney Zahar, and producer emeritus MJ McAddams. Additional audio engineering for select segments provided by Kevin of Straight Line Creative. Logo and banner graphics by Jessica Good. Edward October character design by Nick Calavera. Select stock photography and illustrations courtesy of Unsplash.com. Thorax, theme from Octoberpod, and Overture from Bigfoot Apocalypse, composed and performed by Nico Vitezi. Select music and FX cues courtesy of freesound.org. All other stock photography, illustrations, music, and FX cues, except where noted, are derived from Creative Commons sources or from sources and recordings within the public domain. All stories, essays, scripts, and audio plays performed on Octoberpod AM or Octoberpod Home Video are the intellectual property of their creators. Octoberpod retains the rights to the resultant audio productions and related promotional materials. Any content produced by Octoberpod may not be sold and distributed outside of Octoberpod or used to train AI models without the express written permission of the content owners. Octoberpod was conceived and performed in its entirety by real human creators. Generative AI was not used to produce Octoberpod, and it never will be. For business inquiries or story submissions, email octoberpod@gmail.com. Follow us on the dumpster fire formerly known as Twitter at OctoberpodVHS, on Instagram at OctoberpodVHS, on Blue Sky at octoberpod.bsky.social, or on the World Wide Web at octoberpodvhs.com. The man who spoke to you was Mr. Edward October.
Karen. And I'm Aubrey. And this is Chicklit, a literature comedy podcast where we enjoy getting lit and talking about books we love and love to roast.
We also talk about personal opinions and quote The Office so much that we've made it into a drinking game.
We've been friends for over a decade, so grab your drink of choice and join us for some shenanigans.
Why not get away from it all? Why not book an idyllic cabin vacation? A stay at this cabin could be your last. Relax with the whole family in this cozy and rustic home away from home. This cabin is on the hunt for souls, and it's the setting for 13 spine-chilling tales of an evil that spans centuries. Discover the freedom and adventure that a cabin vacation can offer. A scientist discovers a horrific new species of insect. A child's keepsake becomes a deadly obsession. A ruthless businesswoman meets her match. And honeymooners uncover the dark secret of a rose-tinted mirror. Call now to choose from a variety of plants and amenities to suit your holiday needs. So check in, chill out, and drop dead at Cabin 187. Read Cabin 187 by Dan B. Fierce. Available on Amazon or at danbfiercebooks.com.
Welcome to Chatsunami, a Scottish variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests. Join me, your host, Satsunami, as well as the rest of our Chatsunami team for our takes on these very important pop culture topics.
Sir, it's clearly a trap. I accept your fate! That happens 3 times in the film. Like, every time that general goes, don't do this one thing, he goes, do you know what I'm gonna do? That's exact.
It does as well. She had the pointy teeth. What was that about?
She looked like Bilbo when he wants the ring back.
She did, didn't she? I just want the lightsaber one more time.
Parasite says, no, you will get back into your office and work.
No, says the man in Zoom. Yeah. Trousers are for the working man.
You're bursting into your hotel room. Honey, we need to go.
Leave the kids. You can milk an otage. Oh!
That's the worst thing you've ever said in any of the episodes.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out at our website, chatsunami.com, as well as all good podcast apps. As always, stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated.
Stay classy and have a banana. This has been Satsunami.
I'm sorry.
Hi, Ed. It's Whitney. I hope you're doing well. I'm going to give a try with this script.
The Mischiefs Done by the Mischiefs.
That was me hitting my headphones because my life is crazy. All right, here we go.
Was condemned to the primeval Pinfortitude. Was condemned to the medieval practice of having his body crushed beneath. Rock is pointed out beside Goody Sloper of West Newbury, who went home lame directly. Susie Martin. Okay, so I'm going to skip that one because I don't know what the fuck that one's talking about.
Okay, that's ending 1. With that, I'm going to try. So here's ending 2 for you. See what you think of this one. And so until next time, this is Whitney Zahar wishing you pleasant nightmares. But remember to stay close to the light. All right, so that was ending 2. And I'm going to try the mes amis. I can say that, but, or I could say, stay spooky, here we go. When I did the Para Unity podcast, we would end with, I could say, stay spooky para family. How about that one? Anyway. So I've been dealing with a cold/flu over the last few days, but I hope you enjoyed that part, that stuff. Spooky. All right. Have fun with that. Bye.
Not bad. Not bad. Not